The year is 2015. It's the 10th year since I have started Yellow Chair Productions, a community theatre group in Singapore. To celebrate our 10th anniversary, my team and I have planned an exciting season of work that we had announced. While it was exciting to have hit this milestone, I started pondering the big why. Why are we telling the stories we're choosing to tell? We decided to cancel that season and spent the celebratory year reflecting instead. Inside, I started to question if I was doing theatre for the sake of my vanity or if it were for a higher cause, so to speak. Now, June 2016, we're knee-deep in rehearsals for Bhumi, our debut production at the Edinburgh Fringe, and for our new company, Bhumi Collective. I'm also working on our business plan for the company, for my visa application. Now, Bhumi, the show, is a Singapore-UK collaboration. There were 8 Singaporean and 3 British artists involved, and as we explored the notions of culture, identity, and home, we started to realize that it wasn't just one person's story of finding one's self in a foreign place anymore. We discovered that we were more alike than different, that even those who were born here in the UK were struggling with issues surrounding culture and identity. The issues with being red-haired or being born with dual heritage, for example. Then it hit me. What is the legacy that we're leaving behind for the next generation of theatre makers? What is the story that I am going to tell? And that was when my practice evolved. Now, working on that business plan, the initial idea for the company was to be one that would be making transnational work purely between Singapore and the UK. Now, with the earlier question in mind, we realized that there was so much more that we could be doing as a company and decided that we will open our doors to people from all around the world. Imagine a space where artists of different nationalities can come together to find what connects them. A space where different genres, forms, and mediums can experiment with each other. A space where one can be who they want to be. Groundbreaking? Hardly. New? I'm sure there are collectives and other informal groups out there already doing it, but is this the new norm? Well, the more those of us doing it talk about it, the more it will be. Now, meanwhile, around the world, the rhetoric about difference was growing louder and louder. Individuals and communities being singled out as the other. You will never belong here, get out. As people started thinking about building walls to keep others out, I started thinking about how our borders are becoming blurred today and how theatre can keep them down. Now, prior to making work in the UK, I had never heard of the term BAME or BAME. Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic. When I got here, I was immediately categorized as an Asian theatre maker. Back in Singapore, we have issues with the CMIO, Chinese, Malay, Indian, and others. A simplistic categorization of the primary races in Singapore that was created on a national level. And we have issues surrounding representation in our mainstream media, but those are stories for another day. But in Singapore, in English language theatre, our cast and production and creative teams are generally diverse, as are the stories that we choose to tell, well, most times. That we don't go about thinking about race as much. But being an Asian theatre maker in the UK was a little more complex. As a predominantly Malay and Southeast Asian person, I didn't really feel represented. I found several theatre companies making work about South Asian and East Asian communities, but there were very few work and stories of and about Southeast Asia. I looked around, there were several theatre companies making work about Black communities and other ethnic communities, and in the last 20 to 30 years, these companies have fought hard to get the voices of their respective communities heard and its people seen. And they've done an extraordinary body of work to get things to where they are today. Now, there is a need for this to continue, but I also thought, what's next? Where are the stories that are more reflective of what we see on the streets today? There's a great diversity in a lot of the communities we live in. Different nationalities, backgrounds, cultures, colors, living side by side with each other and communicating with each other on a daily basis. Now, community theatre, applied theatre, theatre in education have taken great strides in making work that's more reflective of the state of things today. But where are these stories on our bigger stages in works made by major companies? Look, I am cool with Shakespeare and our modern classics as much as the next person, but how many Hamlets do we need to keep seeing on the West End every few months? Now, earlier this year, our company worked with the Bunker Theatre in London Bridge on a project called Bunker Without Borders. One of the pieces we presented was a dance piece led by my fellow Joint Artistic Director, Sul Tari Amin Farid, who wanted to work with two other international dancers he had gotten to know. They wanted to explore how the respective dance forms, from traditional cultural dance to hip-hop, could work together. But as they were exploring the piece, they started to realize that above all, they were three Muslim artists from Singapore, Jordan, and Kyrgyzstan who had all converged in the UK. And soon, the story started shaping itself. Did the Southeast Asian, Central Asian, and Middle Eastern Muslim artists have a similar experience of life in the UK, or was it markedly different for each of them? Now, just because it's always been doesn't mean it should be. How do we change things when those who have gotten there before us are refusing to change? There needs to be a continued culture of change at the top that can say, enough with box ticking, enough with KPI fulfilling programs, enough with saying, I don't know where the diverse playwrights, directors, and actors are. Diversity needs to be celebrated all the time and not just as a tokenistic part of one's programming. Now, I discovered something exciting while I was in Edinburgh for the Fringe recently. Now, I am of Malay descent, as I mentioned earlier, and what I know about my family is that on my dad's side, my grandfather's family has its roots in Java in Indonesia, and my grandmother's, that of Malacca in Malaysia. I'm also aware that there are a lot of Malay people spread over the diaspora, not just limited to Southeast Asia. So at the Fringe, we met with a dance company from East Taiwan, and they're made up of the Amis people, which is an indigenous tribe found in Hualien County. And it was amazing to learn that we had a connection between our two communities. We discovered that we had similarities in our spoken languages. And then someone from New Zealand tells us that the language of the Maori people also had its similarities with the Malay language. Now, some of you might think I'm an utter noob for not already knowing this. So I sought Google's help. And I discovered, in addition to what I had already known about our links to Malaysia, Indonesia, and the other parts of Southeast Asia, we could trace our genealogy to the Polynesian, Micronesian, and Turkic lineage, as well as Formosan, which are the Taiwanese Aborigines. Now, there are schools of thought that disagree with the above findings, but what we can't deny is that we are all linked culturally, linguistically, and genetically. And what I'm talking about here is merely the tip of the iceberg. Now, while this obviously got me extremely excited to want to pursue finding out more about my personal lineage and history, the producer in me is going, this sounds like a brilliant opportunity to tear down some borders. The thought of Malay artists working alongside Taiwanese and Maori artists and finding that shared history, common languages, and stories amongst them gave me goosebumps. Now, some of the projects that our company have tried to support the development of in the past year include a Chinese-Polish collaboration exploring the impact of technology on distance-based relationships between mothers and daughters, an exploration of sensuality and violence against the backdrop of military regime in Colombia, something that's not always faithfully captured in TV shows and movies about the country. A Bangladeshi man trapped in a remote hotel in the Scottish Highlands encounters a Scottish girl on a hen night out against the backdrop of modern slavery, based on a true story. Now, there are myriads of stories yet to be told out there that requires telling, and there is a demand for them, which is why representation is important. And if we don't tell these stories, there won't be an audience for them. If we tell them, they will come. Now, it's amazing to learn from East Asian friends who get children coming up to them after their shows, surprised to see a fellow East Asian face in the cast. Now, this harks back to the Edinburgh Fringe last year, where at a roundtable discussion about racial diversity at the Fringe, the comedian Desiree Birch said, "You can't be who you can't see," with regards to representation, and that has stuck with me since. So how do we ensure the longevity of such in the theatre making of tomorrow, you ask? Now, one of the ways is to create an ecosystem or find one that you can be a part of. Now, in Singapore, we've been looking at some of the newer companies that have come up in the last 5 years, and there's this sort of informal network going. We've all got our different niche. We're all trying to carve our own little corner of the industry, trying to support the work of emerging artists, and we're all looking ahead at the parts that we'll be playing in the next 10 to 20 years. Now, earlier this year, one of the companies did an open call for new scripts, and they received about 30 submissions, all from aspiring playwrights in their late teens to the mid-20s. The company eventually selected 3 to 5 pieces that would fulfill their programming for the next 3 years. But what happens to the 20-odd other scripts then? Now, this is where the ecosystem proves useful. The company can introduce the playwrights to other companies that might be more suitable for their work. You're a more experimental theatre company. Here are 3 playwrights who have more of an abstract feel to their work. You're a devised theatre company. Here are playwrights who are interested in the devising process. We're not just looking out for each other as companies. We're looking out for the artists too. Now, it saves them the time taken to prepare 5 to 7 introductions to those companies, and instead they see that they are connected. The companies, artists, and later venues and audiences, they're all part of this great, big, interconnected web. And over time, it won't just be scripts, skill sets, and opportunities that we will be sharing with each other. If our philosophies, values, and attitudes towards diversity is a common one, then the language we speak as art makers will start to ring louder and louder, and it's only a matter of time before it becomes the language of the next generation, that it is the norm. Sometimes, if we keep the doors to our house shut to the world outside, we'll always be looking at what's already inside. We'll always revert to what we already know, respond to what we only know, and retreat from what we will never know. In the midst of all that reflecting in 2015, I found myself in London, pursuing my master's in the very halls of this building. I opened my door, took a step outside, closed my eyes, and took a long and deep breath. And when I opened them, I realized that from that point onwards, I'll always be looking out, never just in. From that point onwards, everything made sense, because reflection. It's easy to react and respond. Anyone can do it. Brexit, let's make a show about Brexit. Trump, let's make a show about Trump. But what aspects of those events should we focus on? Do we jump on the bandwagon of Brexit and Trump bashing? Or do we sieve the stories that require telling? Stories about families that could potentially be torn apart. Communities that are oppressed. Stories about how politics has trumped common sense. The way for us to ensure what we make today resonates and remains relevant tomorrow is reflection. Someone builds a wall up. The art we make are the 1,000 tiny hammers chipping away at it. someone tries to pull and tear us apart, the art we make are the 1,000 needles and threads that stitch them closer together. As an artistic community, we need to come together and plant the seeds for our industry's future. Let the child who comes into the theatre discover that the magic of theatre isn't just in its ability to widen one's imagination, but the magic is also in the child's ability to see one's self, community, and people represented on stage. Representation matters. We all matter. Thank you.